Hi there, I'm Vern Frykholm with George Washington Speaks. We're here today with Rob Edwards. Rob is an 8th grade civics teacher in Port Angeles, Washington, in the Port Angeles School District. He teaches 5 classes a day of civics. And so we've had him come over here and chat with us about civics in this school, in the 8th grade school. Now, Rob, you've been teaching civics in the Port Angeles School District for how many years?
Yeah, I think you're familiar with probably my last 5 years.
Okay, and that's as civics?
As strictly just a civics teacher, yes.
Okay. But we shared over lunch here a few weeks ago about what you were doing before that, which has absolutely nothing to do with civics. And I was wondering, how do you go from that to civics and history? So would you kind of explain those 25 years before, why you made the jump to civics?
Sure. So the short version is I spent 25 years trying to get kids on computers, and I've spent the last 5 years trying to get them off computers. So I was initially I'm endorsed in social studies. I have a minor in history, and then when I started in the early 90s, that was right at that same time frame where there were a few computers sitting in a room, and then one day I was that generation that got to take and plug the computers into the wall. And so as I worked with my kids, and these were social studies, language arts classes, I started to do some really cool things by networking computers, getting on the internet, and eventually I was asked to teach media technology / social studies. There was always a content base to it because we were always doing civic engagement projects through the media. So after 25 years of that, right before we went into COVID 2019, we restructured some of our school day, and they were putting the 8th grade civics program back together, and they approached me and asked me if I wanted to do that. And it was a very natural jump because it was clear to me that kids had really lost that historical perspective, the hands-on basic perspective, because of technology. Doesn't mean I don't like technology. I love what we're doing here. I believe this will end up, probably in the social media realm. But there was always a concept of tool or toy. Are you using this technology for a very productive purpose, or is it becoming a toy? And I saw many of these kids, quite frankly, they were being turned into a product on their phone. They're spending hours on their phone. And so my approach to social studies, and remember this was prior to COVID-19, my approach was going to be to build a platform for these kids that they could learn civics on their phone, but yet it was going to be a paper pencil experience, and to try to build that hybrid. So you ask how I got onto civics. Really, I went back to civics after a 25-year hiatus doing the technology revolution. It was a wonderful part of our history, but the real history that I wanted to teach kids was, where does your freedom come from, and what is the Constitution? Because kids had lost contact with that.
Okay, why is that important to kids today?
Because they not only didn't know that their voice was important anymore, they were starting to lose their voice, which really ties us back into that First Amendment thing, right? I mean, the First Amendment is your voice. If you don't have a voice, you can't protect the rest of what's in the amendments or the Constitution. And with the technology, what they had started to do was they were just receiving. Everything they're doing is scrolling or texting or receiving. And that's why the video production, the media component, the news broadcast was important to me, because these kids were always pushing out a message. Again, they were using the technology as a tool to be part of the civic engagement at their school, even though it wasn't our traditional civics class with the history, with the content. They were still in charge of the media. They were the media. They were doing just like we're doing here, but they would do that for ASB elections and so forth. And so they understood, how technology was important. The problem was, in the meantime, as a result of that, they weren't learning the concrete history. And so there was only one of me. I didn't know how to try to do both. I was spread pretty thin. Our language arts programs then picked up a hybrid language arts / history, but it became clear at some point that we needed to bring history back as a standalone. I was very comfortable letting go of the technology because I knew I would still keep it. I would just keep the components that I wanted to, and instead of teaching programming and HTML and web design I would do it in a smaller way with a smaller group. And it's kind of interesting too, because just this year, even since we talked, I was asked to bring back our ASB infrastructure in our building. And so I've been working with a team of kids, putting together elections, but all of it started with the Constitution. We found a 2016 copy of the Constitution, and so we've been taking steps to rebuild that infrastructure, and kids are definitely very interested. It's almost like this lost thing that they're rediscovering again, so the timing has been just great.
Okay, so there are opinions of school nowadays and what kids are learning and what have you. And you're saying they need to discover their voice. So do these kids have anything of significance to say?
Very much so. The trick is to get them talking.
Okay.
And much of what they say or they repeat or what they hear is now being pushed on them. I mean, you know, the latest phase is what? Artificial intelligence. I mean, those of us that study technology or we pay attention to what the trends are, we know that that's always been there in the background.
Okay.
We know that everything is data driven. The problem is that's not promoting their individual thought. And so what's happening now is by reminding them that they do have a First Amendment right, that they need to be part of the conversation, they need to be generating the conversation, and especially with bringing back the ASB component, we're now getting to that phase where we're ready to start asking them, what is important in your school? What is important in your governance? What are you seeing that's not working? How do we put a team together to address those issues versus, you know, this is what you're going to do, this is what other schools are doing, this is what you see happening in the schools. For example, I'll give you a very concrete example.
Please, yes.
The phase now is, you know, if there is a scuffle or a fight in school, believe it or not, middle school kids end up kind of pushing and shoving a little bit.
Okay.
The normal response used to be, you know, the good kids would break it up, you'd pull them apart, and, you know, the consequences would run their course. Now, kids encourage it, pull out their cell phones because they're going to get 15 seconds of fame by recording that incident. And so they're seeing that at the national level. That's what's getting promoted at the national level. That's what's going to get likes and hits, right? Like and hit in the same word. They're like a lick, right? So they're trying to get likes. They're trying to get hits. We need to reteach that that's really not the way that we're supposed to function. Real civics engagement would be to prevent that fight in the first place. Or if you did see a fight, filming it is probably not the thing that you want to be doing. You want to actually be stepping up and saying, "Hey, gentlemen, let's separate for a minute. Let's kind of rethink this.
Interesting.
Let's get you, someplace where you can talk about this and work through whatever's going on." So it is a little bit of a challenge. I mean, the social media is very strong and it's very influential in their lives. But that's where you and I, or your efforts, through your George Washington Speaks program. We have to start reteaching kids what that civics foundation, that civics responsibility really is, especially when it's being marketed by a multi-billion-dollar industry that says it's all about likes, it's all about hits, and you're going to do what you can to get those. It might be a little bit slower, it might not be as fancy, but breaking up a fight is definitely beneficial to not only you and your classmates, but civility in general.
Well, it's interesting to me that a school district sees this and says we need to step up, and that how did that work out? You were working with them, and how did that come to where they actually said, okay, we're going to make the switch, and you devote yourself to 5 civics classes a day?
Sure. So the story does involve the last 5 years, and if you weren't teaching before COVID, and if you didn't teach through COVID, and you weren't teaching now to get that big perspective, there were a number of shifts that took place. And so that conversation about putting civics back in place was pre-COVID, right?
Okay,
so that was 2019, 2020. That's the year that we were sent home. And so as we made a schedule change and we recognized that the language arts programs weren't able to focus specifically on civics responsibilities as a standalone, they turned that into a semester course. They also knew that I had the background in civics, that social studies was my background. They also knew that I had that history in technology. And what I told them is, look, I think we can do both. I think I can set up a program, because I also coached, I also raised daughters. I understand that times are changing. I'm not old school, but yet I have old school standards. The goal was to build a program that could be designed for their phones. Again, tool or toy. If a kid was gone for a week, it didn't matter, because their instruction would all be online.
Okay.
But yet we called it bricks and mortar. The material that was online, the bricks, right? Concrete. You got
Yes, yes.
you know, links to videos. You've
Right.
got my worksheets. You've got the things that you need to do.
Okay.
We call it growing your brain. But the mortar is the experience that you're going to have in class. That's going to be where you have a debate, or we talk in depth about a primary document. That's where you fit in, is on the Thursdays, which is our primary document day. So what we do is we bring in living history, and you have worked really, really hard to represent your character, and we can talk more about that, you know, specifically. Then COVID hit. The beautiful part, we got sent home. Everything got shut down. I kept going,
Yes.
because already I was online. We had to do a few tweaks. We had to get the Chromebooks out to the kids. And then when we tapped back in and the lights came back on and the flickering, I mean, you can almost see the scene here, right? And all of a sudden, through the static, you know, the teacher shows up, the students show up, and it's like, hey, we got this. Let's keep going.
Yeah. Awesome. That is great. Well, now, you heard about me, I heard about you. You invited me over last semester and again this semester, and I think that our connecting point was the Daughters of the American Revolution, and that kind of came through with an award that you got. Tell me about the Daughters of the American Revolution award that you got.
One of the components of the program that I knew early on was going to be important was to connect the kids to community. The Daughters of American Revolution on that particular year, 2019, had approached me, and they do this on an annual basis with their annual essay contest.
Okay.
They have 3 pillars of their organization, which is, you know, civic engagement, you know, historic preservation, and education. That education pillar really hadn't been built out fully yet. They're a very strong group. They're an up-and-coming group in our area. And Ginny Wagner approached me about the essay contest, and so I ran with that, and I got a really beautiful, in fact, it's one of the personal items that still sits in my classroom, a little Mayflower ship that sits on my desk. And so somehow we had pulled off that essay contest, COVID hits, we get sent home, and then I kind of lose connection with them. Well, when we came back from COVID, Ginny and I sat down and we talked, and the need at that point was, in some aspects, I needed some help with remediation. There were some kids that had stopped doing school. We had lost a few of those kids, yeah.
All right.
And so she started helping and taking her organization and her team and provided a tutoring infrastructure. And so on Tuesdays, when we do our reading and writing component of the class, they have now made themselves available, and they come in and they provide a tutoring service for kids that need to get caught back up. So they kind of stepped out of their normal essay contest focus and realized, wait a second, so it was a two-way street. It wasn't that I found them, it's that we took what they were doing, evolved that into what the kids need, and now they're working, you know, kids are now working with an adult that sits down and says, how can I help you? I got an hour. And for some kids, that is a foreign concept, but it has paid dividends, and we see that in the number of kids that are decreasing as failures in my class. Now we have a safety net that's picking those kids up, and we have kids that are now asking on Tuesdays, hey, is the tutor going to be here, because I want the tutor.
Excellent, excellent. And so kind of this has been a transition, COVID, rebuilding this, readjusting. So over this past 4 or 5 years, what would you say is your high point or 2 high points that you've said, yes, I'm loving it?
I tell the kids, my goal for you isn't to love history or to love civics. My goal for you is to not dislike it. And they're kind of like, well, what do you mean by that, Mr. Edwards?
Yeah.
I said, this isn't an easy subject to speak with 13-year-olds. I call them 13-year-olds during first semester, and then second years, 14-year, because you don't want to mess that up, right?
Yes,
If you're a
exactly.
13-year-old, you've turned 14, you don't want to be a 13-year anymore. And that's why, for me, 8th grade has been such a valuable age group. That's why I've stayed in the middle school level. Some people will say, wait a second, those are crazy teenagers. My perspective is, no, they're young adults that are just evolving out of their elementary experience. And I said it happens that 13 and 14-year-old year, and to be there for those kids and to be able to guide that process and to set that standard has been very, very beneficial. And so for me, watching those kids transition every year, and it's happening right now. This is I think we're in week number 13 right now. So
Okay.
we're working on the Great Depression. That's the phase that we're in right now.
see. Okay.
I introduced Unit 18, which is a state assessment where they'll take a constitutional issue, write a claim, and write a paper. If you walk in that classroom right now, you would even see a difference from when you were there earlier this semester.
Okay.
You would see kids that are focused. You would see kids that were maybe getting in trouble. They've kind of quieted down and they're starting to pay attention now. And they're starting to realize that, wait a second, this program, and I work with a team. I got to credit my ELA teachers as well. I mean, because on the writing, I do a lot of the writing component, but they provide a lot of support for that on the grammar side or on the training side. So there's a little bit of a team effort that goes into this. Civics, as you say, when it was divided out of the language arts program, we knew that it would take a team component in order to get this done. And so all of us are starting to see that growth in those kids.
Wow.
Again, there's always going to be the outliers. There's always going to be the aspects of teaching that wear us out, and the demand is real. I mean, it's very real. But what you're really getting out of it right now are some kids who are understanding that there is a history. It's their history, it's our history. We have to work to preserve it. Freedom is, the cliche is not free, but they're starting to understand why. And they're starting to understand that academics is part of their their civic responsibility if they're able to participate in building strong communities, whatever level you're talking about, local, state, it doesn't matter to us. Obviously, I focus on U.S. history, which is national, but they're getting to become aware that they are part of that story and that they have to enter that story in some aspect.
So talk to me about your civics class that you have. Are the kids interested in civics class, and how many are fairly regular, and what do they do in civics class?
Having the background in technology, I tried to design a program that was an experience for them. They come in on Monday and we set the stage for whatever topic it's going to be for the week. Again, this week was the Great Depression. And so I use a video series that basically uses the media, it gets their attention, it's Hollywood level stuff, right?
Okay.
And so they watch their video, and I tell them this is opening your brain. It's not going to stay in your brain, right? You're a passive observer when you're watching something. But today you realize that there was a Great Depression. The next day is when they dig into the chapters in their book. And for many of them, it's really, really hard. We discuss this. This isn't your phone entertaining you. This is you sitting down with your own brain, a piece of paper, a textbook, a pencil, and you're going to literally read a chapter in the book. And as a result of that, you're then going to take notes. I said, now you're starting to grow brain. You haven't written your essay yet, but you've gotten your question, you got your handout on Monday, and Tuesday you're reading about it. On Wednesday, they take those notes, they take what they've learned in those first 2 days, and then they start drafting their essay. And then they answer the essay question in a 5-paragraph essay. This week, the question was, how did the Great Depression affect the American citizen? Okay. Then on Thursday, that's primary document.
Primary doc.
So today, we listen to, and again, I'm using the technology, right? It's dry, it's black and white, but yet you got the handout, so you're reading it, and you're reading Roosevelt's 1933, inaugural speech talking about let's get our country back together. And then that led us into a conversation about the national debt. So they start to realize that there is economics. I'm not teaching them economics. They've only got 19 weeks, right? So I don't overload them. I keep it at a real basic level. And so today that they learned that there is economics, there is a national debt. And then it kind of brings it, like this is Thursday, right? We study this historical topic. But now Thursday, we're talking about something that's like real right now.
Yes, right.
And then that's called primary document day. For you, you come in on primary document day as a guest speaker. And then on Friday, it's debate day. And on debate day, then you have a conversation on something that would almost be controversial, right? And we know that politics right now is very divided. We know that we have to be careful as teachers. I'm not there to give them my politics. I'm not there to give them, my right or my left-wing perspective. That's for them to decide. What I'm telling them is there's always two sides to an issue, and the truth is usually someplace in the middle. And that's your history that's going to allow you to sort that out and figure that out. And that's you, and that's your voice. And that's where we keep going back to that First Amendment.
Yes.
Is your voice. Learn to develop your voice, because that's what's going to maintain the freedom for all of us. Okay. And every week it's the same thing. Okay. So what happens is these kids that are afraid of a subject or the hard work or the writing an essay every week, after like 6, 7, 8 weeks, it's like, wait a second, I can do this. Now we're to the point where they can do a 5-paragraph essay by Tuesday and get that thing done. They know how to do that.
Wow.
There's still going to be the kids that are struggling.
Sure.
Thus again, Daughters of American Revolution, or my retired teachers that are coming in and working, with these kids. But now we're getting to really start to talk about real topics and real issues. And that's why today I introduced finally, which will be the culminating state assessment, which is a research paper essentially on constitutional issues at the balance of individual rights.
Okay, so Thursday, primary document, George comes in,
Absolutely.
Spends 50 minutes.
Awesome experience.
Okay, so if you were to point out some of the best things about George's presence in the classroom in primary document day, what do you think that George, he is complementing what you're trying to do there? What does he do that you'd say, yes, that's exactly what you're trying to do in this classroom?
The first thing that happens when the kids walk in the room, and really it happens prior to even entering the classroom, it happens at the door, the kids literally stop, and it's just kind of like this.
I recognize that.
Because there's this thing in the room,
yes,
right? There's this historical figure that's standing there. They've just studied the American Revolution. They've looked at the picture of crossing the Delaware.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, there's this historical figure standing in the classroom. It's at that moment that you see a side of the kids that doesn't come out during the textbook part of the course.
Okay.
And to them, it brings that moment to life. You, George Washington, you and I kind of go back and forth as and we're figuring it out, right?
Yes.
You're observing these kids, you're trying to figure out how to read them, what their needs are. And then as you meet them as George Washington, and we've tried it both ways, and I don't know that we've perfected it and figured out which one is right, but all of a sudden you start interacting with those kids as a historical figure. You have worked really hard, and I think we're finding that tying back to the youthful story of George Washington, his personal struggles. I think right now a lot of our culture is kind of discussing or relating or trying to figure out how do we build our personal struggles into where we're going. You've found that balance, and these kids are mesmerized that George Washington too had a past. He had a story. He was a kid, but somehow through trial and error and struggle and getting knocked down and getting back up, somehow he led our country as a leader. Eventually he became the president, and as a quiet guy, obviously he kind of slid away into his farm and wanted our country to be able to move on with the next leader, right? They get that. And then, it's just that whole idea of wanting to feel, wanting to touch, wanting to come up and get an autograph. Some kids have got rewarded with a coin, and that coin just kind of filters through the class for the next few days where you see it was like, wow, George Washington gave me a gift. And so the real gift, right, that you're giving them is you're allowing them to reflect on that whole idea that there was a past, that there was a history, and then you take the hat off, which symbolizes, hey, I'm here. I'm a resident of Sequim, Washington. I'm a citizen. I'm a volunteer. You are important to me. You're important to my family. I've committed a lot of time and a lot of energy into trying to make this experience real for you. And I think, you know, that day you probably have the slowest exodus of my class that I see all semester long. They don't want to leave. They still want to be part of that story. They still want to like hang out. They want to get selfies with you. They want to get group photos, right? And so it's clear that what you bring in works.
Great.
And we can document that evidence over and over, you know, 100 different ways.
Yeah, and it's interesting, some of the ones that seem to be most, you know, not engaged afterwards, they come up, they've been listening the whole time. And for me personally, you know, that is cool. I really love that.
Well, and I see that too, right? Because it's that quiet student that's sitting in the back.
Yes, right.
And all of a sudden you've tapped into something that I haven't seen before. I'm watching that interaction.
Neat.
And they come up and they speak, they talk to you, and those small little things. They don't happen all the time, but every once in a while you tap into a student or a kid that needed a little bit extra. 100% worth the whole experience, because sometimes it's that little different thing that connects with them.
Yeah. Last question. You met Mark Curtis, the Northwest Colonial Reenactors, here a little bit earlier today. And he had asked me a question a couple of days ago. Or actually, I'd asked him a question, and he had said that history is our future. I kind of sat back a little bit, and of course, they bring history from the colonial times to classrooms and other groups 250 years ago, and they also are in period clothing, and they will cook, they will sew, they will make things, they will shoot muskets, and that's pretty much like it was 250 years ago. And it's not just replicating what they were doing, but they always have a story about their character. Every story has a moral to it. And so he says, history is our future. What do you think about that?
We've heard those quotes said many different ways.
Okay.
And you know, you think about the exact words are right. Our history is our future, right? For me, what I would say is our kids are our future.
Okay.
And helping our kids understand their history helps them understand where they're going. Now, I don't know what that future looks like. They're the ones that get to chart that.
Right, right.
My job, your job, our job,
Exactly.
you also spend time. I know you've been able to peel out and slide over to the kindergarten level. I know my wife also teaches
Yes.
kindergarten. So you were able to, you know, give up your lunch and go work with her kids, and the same experience. You walked in, and all of a sudden, your physical representation came out of their little kindergarten picture books, and all of a sudden, hey, that's the guy that we saw in our books.
Yeah.
So literally, I mean, you're impacting their future. You're allowing them to see, you know, where it is that they're going. And then obviously Lucy could talk about, well, and also in 8th grade, you know, you're going to hear about, you know, George Washington again when you hear your full U.S. history, right?
Yes, yes.
And so I think if we continue to realize that our kids really are our future, then it's how we shape them. And if we shape them by helping them understand their past and the struggle of the country that they live in, the history of where their freedom came from, people who gave up greatly in order for us to have not only what we have today. We'll go back to the Great Depression. That was the topic of today's conversation in class, right? They didn't feel that pain.
Yeah, yeah.
They may have family members or loved ones that felt that pain of that Great Depression. And when Roosevelt was saying, you know, we need to fight our way out of this, right? We just come out of World War I, we're going to go into World War II. You had a country that really knew what hardship was like, right?
Yes, yes.
How do we teach kids today whose basic needs are truly met? I mean, because we have a lot of safety nets in place. Those kids don't know that true pain. And so to take and show them their past, their history, people that struggled, don't we want to avoid that pain again? Now, a little pain is good, right? We say a little stress is good, a lot of stress is bad. We don't need to relive some of those mistakes we made in the past.
Yes.
At the same time, some of those experiences we're going to relive again, because we have to be reminded a little bit of that historic pain. So we're going to make some mistakes, right?
Yes,
That's how we learn. You touch a hot stove and it's hot, you don't do it again. And so there has to be a little bit of struggle in that process for kids, and we have to build that in, whether that's through sports or whether that's through adversity. But world wars, it'd be nice to avoid those again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is for sure. Well, I have the privilege of entering into your classroom once a year, and I get a sliver of what you do all year long. And so the history, the story of our beginning is the history of the growth of our culture. And when we think about the American identification, that's who we are. We're a people that time and time again adapt, innovate, and they step up to whatever is put before them. That is their legacy. So we don't, we don't have an ethnicity, don't have a language, don't have a government that never changes. It's we the people. And our ability to change is faster than any other culture on the face of the earth. It always has been. And that's part of their legacy. But how are they going to change? Well, it's up to them. Thank you for coming and chatting with me. I look forward to coming back and chatting with another one of your classrooms, and that helps me too with what you've shared. So
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
thank you.